Welcome to the Mike White Podcast, where I, Mike White, share my conversations and book reviews through my journey to learn all that goes on in this amazing world. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
All right, this week on the Mike White Podcast, we are doing a book review. So finances and money is a difficult topic for a lot of families, a lot of couples. A lot of people don't like to worry about finances. It's something that adds a lot of stress, but I think it's very important, and that's why this week I want to cover the book YNAB by Jesse Mecham. And YNAB stands for you need a budget, because we all need a budget. We all need to know our financial situation, know where our money's going, what we value, what our priorities are, and the budget gives us that tool in order to make that the best decision. So I really push against the whole ignorance is bliss argument when it comes to money. In general in life, that's silly. And when it comes to money, it's even more important not to have that attitude. So in the book, he talks about first introduction in the first chapter about YNAB being a system and a mindset. So the system is something I've used since 2012. It's a software, and I was kind of into budgeting. I was looking at Mint, I think, was the free budget thing, and I did that. It wasn't super helpful. I always, went over or didn't use it, didn't look at it. And then my dad told me about YNAB, tried it out, and this was early YNAB where you didn't even have the option to have your purchases be automated. So every purchase, I'd go in there and enter it every day or every week, to see where I'm at. And I really fell in love with it because it's a whole different way of the traditional form of budgeting. So that system is the envelope money type system where back in the day, you used to have a certain amount of cash, right? And you would have different envelopes for each category. So you'd have a groceries envelope, maybe a restaurant's one. You'll have rent, all those expenses that you have, and you put aside, okay, I got $2,000 for my mortgage or whatever, $300 for eating out, and you put it actually in the physical envelope. So you go to eat out, you take that money from the envelope. Okay, this is all I got to spend. And it's really not practical, right? That's a lot of work, especially in today's day and age. No one uses cash. So that's not a good system. So Jesse made his own system based off that with a spreadsheet. And that's what turned into YNAB, the software. So that's the system. It's not necessary. You can do it your own way. I highly recommend YNAB. It makes it easy. It has a lot of cool features. But more importantly, YNAB, there's a mindset behind the system, and that's what he talks about in the book. So YNAB, the mindset. And that mindset can be broken down into 4 simple rules. Really, rule number 1 is the most important. So we'll start out with that. Rule number 1 is give every dollar a job. Quote, ask yourself, what do I want my money to do for me? So that's the core tenet in YNAB. The government would not have a good time in YNAB because it's very not debt friendly. Like it's Jesse's definitely on more of the Dave Ramsey side, which I'm not, but I still gain a lot of value from YNAB, and I believe, yeah, you should give every dollar a job. So he talks about starting with survival. So start with those categories that you need to spend money on every day to carry out life. So like food, shelter, whether you have loan payments that you have to pay every month, school or work expenses. So you got to drive to work, right? So all those are non-negotiable pretty much. So start with those. But you think they're non-negotiable, still have that questioning attitude. Is this a habit or is this obligation? So say you spend $500 a month on food, and once you start listing all that out, you realize, wait, this is because I'm eating at work or at school every day. I'm ordering out when I could be saving a lot more money if I bring my lunch. So it kind of forces you to make that assessment of what is a habit of buying lunch at work, whereas an obligation is that you need food. It doesn't necessarily have to be at work. You could bring it and save some money. So figure out what your habits are and what your obligations are and prioritize what's more important. And you're forced to prioritize, right? Because you got a fixed amount. It's not everything's laid out. You can't just be ignorant and ignore that fact and just put everything on your credit card and add to the debt. The goal is to eventually get rid of that credit card debt. Quote, this isn't about depriving yourself. The point is to question your habitual reactions to what you assume are obligations. So it's not, maybe eating out is valuable to you. Maybe once a week, like all the coworkers get together and you have that lunch out, and that's really important. You don't want to give that up. Okay, that's an obligation. So put that in your obligation. Like, don't try to cut that, because then it's going to add more stress. You're going to feel like you're missing out. You want to do this. It's important to you, and you're limiting yourself. So only you know what is valuable to yourself and how much that's worth. And that's all YNAB is asking of you, is to make that assessment. Think of that critically and don't just go with the flow. But don't deprive yourself, right? And also has got a section about prioritizing your priorities. So talks about write down your quality of life goals. So after you meet those survival goals, and hopefully, maybe it's not the case, but hopefully you'll have some left over. And then you need to make priorities. And as much as you want to fund all these things, when you lay it out and give every dollar a job, you realize you can't do everything. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And that's the beauty of what YNAB gives you, is it really makes sure that you're spending your money where you want to. Because money, I'm a Bitcoiner. I think money is awesome. Money is your receipt of value. It's your receipt of productivity. It's like, hey, I did something that was worthwhile. Like I was productive, and this is that proof of it, and it's awesome, right? So treat it with the proper respect that it is. Don't just fling it around like our government does, right? So take control. Quote, also remember that budgeting isn't just about tackling your burdens. The bigger goal is to help you move towards living the life you want. So also give priority to the things that bring you joy and peace of mind. Right there, right? So that is the ultimate goal: joy and peace of mind, quality of life. Money shouldn't be a burden. Money shouldn't be the thing that's adding stress to your life, right? So in order for that to get to that state, you need to take ownership, take control of the situation, and deal with the reality as it is. Don't just ignore it. Quote, you're the only one who can know what's right for you depending on your priorities and situation. So with this, he's saying, like, there's not one rule that fits all. Like, some may say, oh, only spend 20% of your income on your living, on your rent or whatever. Like, there's no rule like that. It's up to you. Maybe you'd rather live closer to work or school and pay a little more in rent, but then you also realize you're saving with your fuel expenses, or maybe you could sell your car if you move that close. So only you know what the right answer is. And the important thing is you're thinking about that. You're thinking about options. And in order to do that, you need it all listed out. And that's YNAB, right? So it's important. Rule 2 is embrace your true expenses. Quote, rule 2 is all about thinking long and acting now. So what does that mean? That's talking about these periodic expenses you'll have throughout the year that you don't really think of. And if you're not budgeting for them or putting money aside, that month is going to be extra painful. One of the obvious, so he breaks these down into predictable and unpredictable. So one of the obvious or most common predictable expenses would be your car insurance. So it's not like your car payment where every month you're paying, if you have a loan on that. Your car insurance, you only pay every 6 months. So every 6 months, if you're not saving for it, it's going to be a punch in the stomach. So if, say, you're paying $600 or $1,200 a year, so every 6 months you need to pay $600. He really argues that you need to be putting aside $100 a month for that to be prepared, so it's not a surprise. So try to do that mental exercise, look at your past statements, see these periodic expenses that you don't spend every month that you may forget about but are going to happen, and put money aside for that. So some unpredictable ones. So another predictable is like Christmas, or the holidays, birthdays. You're going to be buying gifts, and if you wait till December to budget that, that's going to be tough. You're not going to have pretty much any money. So put a little bit aside all year long so you're not surprised. The unpredictable category, say you have pets, maybe like vet visits. You don't plan on something bad happening, but everyone I've known that has had a pet has had to take their dog or cat or whatever to the vet at some point for maybe an emergency or something like that. So make sure you're setting those funds aside to prepare for that situation. I have a fund for like car repairs in case I got to pay, my insurance deductible when something happens to my car. So stuff like that you should be planning toward, so it's not a surprise, it's not a punch in the gut. With that, once you get to a certain amount, you don't have to keep funding that. So say my car deductible, I was putting $50 a month towards that, and now I actually reached that number to where, okay, this is how much it would cost to pay the deductible if I got in an accident. I don't necessarily need to keep putting more. Maybe I do want to have like twice that amount just to be extra cautious. But once you feel comfortable with that amount, you can shift using that money to something else. So assign those dollars a new job. And that's the beauty of YNAB. That's why I like the software so much, is it shows it out to you. You could do it in a spreadsheet. It's just a lot of work. Highly recommend just doing the software. All right. So that was rule 2, was embrace your true expenses. Rule number 3 is roll with the punches. So I think rule number 3 is important so that you stick with a budget. Like I was saying with mint.com, I quit that really quickly because I was like, oh, this is stupid. I got a budget, but I'm never adhering to it. It's not doing me any good. Why am I even looking at this? And the whole concept of YNAB is not to have that strict budget, but it's a flexible plan. And he stresses you're not cheating when you spend more than what you budgeted. Quote, you have to change your budget if you ever expect to stick with it. So that's the budget is there to show you your priorities and to make you assess your priorities. If you consistently are spending $400 a month on groceries when you only are budgeting $300, you got to ask yourself, why is that? Maybe that it's just that important to you that you want that high quality food, and you'd rather put that $400 a month and then take the extra from somewhere else. And so that's being accountable for your money. That's being responsible. What's the opposite of that is if you're spending $400 a month and you're going into debt into that and you're not making any other adjustments, right? So that's not being accountable because you're choosing to not deal with reality and just go rely on debt for that. And eventually that plan can't last. Again, as much as the government likes to believe it can, you cannot just go into debt forever and just keep paying your monthly payment. It's not sustainable. So roll with the punches, adjust your plan as needed. So the key thing there is that you move money around, right? So you're not just, if you give more money to one category, it's got to come from somewhere else. But you should be doing that. You should be mixing it up, because just like we had Colonel Rose Tonka on the last episode, he's a fighter pilot. He talked about what was the quote? No plan survives first contact with the enemy. So it's important to have the plan, but also know that it's probably not going to go to plan, and you'll have to be flexible. Quote, accountability is dealing with the truth of every decision you make. So it's not sticking to the plan, but it's dealing with, okay, this is reality. I got to adjust. That's accountability. That's what's important. And then another quote is, it's not a failure, but a reprioritization. So I think that's a good summary of roll with the punches. Now, rule number 4 is age your money. Now, this is hard or difficult to do if you don't use the software, but the concept still applies. The age of money is probably the biggest, not the biggest, but it's a huge reason of why the software is nice. So quote, rule 4, age your money gets you to the point where you don't need your next paycheck. So to explain age your money, it's he uses like a cereal analogy. I'll go into that, but so quote, money's age is based on the gap of time between when you earn the money, cereal coming in, and when you spend the money, cereal coming out. And when I mean cereal in and out, he's talking about those big containers you'll see at the grocery store and the college dining halls that you just go up and um, open the handle and cereal coming out of the bottom, and you got to whoever works there has to refill it up at the top. So if you're going paycheck to paycheck, that cereal you're eating was just put in there that day, right? So it's like right when you get your money, you spend it, and that's that's a stressful way to live. So the goal should be to make that time longer. And there's no one perfect time, right? So everyone's going to have their different length. Maybe someone's comfortable with a 30-day age of money that, that they got that money a month ago, whereas others that's too small for them and they want to go to 60. So you can pick your own goal, but ultimately the larger your age of money is, the more you can just go without working and still keep up with your expenses because you're saving. So it's like a intentional saving, not just throwing all this money into some general savings account and not really knowing how much you need. YNAB shows you that and it gives a time value to it, which is really helpful. So quote, it's nearly impossible to see clearly when you're living paycheck to paycheck. I 100% agree with that. It adds a lot of stress. Quote, whatever your approach, achieving rule 4 goal boils down to consistently spending less than you earn. Sounds easy, but that's how that happens, right? And there's going to be times that are more difficult than others. And so YNAB is embracing that and making sure you're thinking about that and trying to get yourself in the best financial situation you can be in. So those are the four rules. So rule number 1, give every dollar a job. Rule number 2, embrace your true expenses. Rule number 3, roll with the punches. And then rule number 4, age your money. So he goes into some other topics as well after laying out the mindset. One of them is how budgeting as a couple, which I think is really important because that's a common cause for conflict, is finances in a relationship. It's hopefully you have that talk early, and because eventually it's going to come up. So the big thing is being on the same page there, having a healthy relationship with money, having clear communication with your values of money. Everyone grows up a little differently and everyone's going to have a different relationship. So it's important to realize that and see where the other's coming from so you can agree on a common path forward. And having YNAB is a great way to lay out that and lay out your priorities. Another chapter is slaying debt, whatever your situation. So this is where I kind of disagree with him. I think a mortgage is fine, depending on how big it is, right? And if you can afford it or not. But he likes to pay off all debt. And I agree with like consumer credit card debt. The interest rate there is hard to justify. That like there's no way you're getting those returns, and the risk is super high. So like it's very rare it's a good investment to go into debt. Usually it's more out of necessity. So it should be your goal to pay off that debt as soon as possible. And he goes into ways to approach that. So that's another good chapter. And then another one is teaching your kids how to budget. So that's something, it's kind of crazy when you think about it, with something as important as managing money. we don't get an education in school about it, and a lot of kids don't have that conversation with their parents. So he goes in the chapter. He's not like, oh, this is the way you need to give your kids an allowance, or you need to do this, need to do that. He doesn't say that. He says each situation's a little different. He does recommend more of an allowance base rather than paid off of the different chores they do. That's how they initially were doing it with their kids, is like, oh, depending on how much you do around the house is how much you're going to get paid. So he goes into why he doesn't do that anymore. And he explains his allowance system. But the big takeaway there is that you need to be having those conversations with your kids and trying to give them that financial education to set themselves up for a good relationship with money when they become an adult. And it's better to learn the lessons with money young than when you're an adult, and the consequences are definitely more severe. So I really liked the book. I love the software. I was a big fan of this. I think the book came out in like 2015. 2017. So this is when I was like graduating college, and I was using this since high school. So I was a big believer of YNAB before this, but this is like all you really need. The software is great, but the mindset is the key. I hope you check out the book. I'll have all the links in the show notes. And let me know what you think if you're trying it out. If you have any questions, I'm a huge YNAB fan. Have no relation with them at all. Like, of course, they're not sponsoring this or anything like that. That'd be cool. But I'm a huge fan. So if there's any trouble you're having with the software, want to see how you best use it, I'll first recommend, like, there's a ton of good YouTube videos. Jesse's awesome, and YNAB's really good company. They explain it really well. But if you want to talk to a person, like, I'm always there. I'm always accessible. So would love to hear it, and hope this was helpful. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Mike White Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mike White Pod, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Y'all have a great day.